My parents charged me rent while my siblings lived free, so I evicted them from my life. I turned 18 and my parents immediately started charging me $600 a month to live at home. Said it was to teach me responsibility and prepare me for the real world. I was still in high school, working part-time at a grocery store making minimum wage, but they insisted. Every month, first of the month, they wanted their money. I barely had anything left after paying them, but figured this was just how it worked when you became an adult. I paid every single month through the rest of senior year. Then I noticed something weird. My brother Jason turned 18 6 months after me. No rent. My parents said he was focusing on his music and didn't need the stress. He sat in his room playing video games all day and sometimes messed around on his guitar for 20 minutes. They bought him a new amplifier for his birthday that cost $2,000. My sister Ashley turned 18 a year later. No rent for her either. She was apparently too busy with her influencer career. She had 400 followers on TikTok and posted maybe once a week. My parents bought her a ring light and a new phone to help her content creation. Meanwhile, I was working full-time after graduation, going to community college at night, and still paying $600 a month. When I asked why only I paid rent, my mom said I was the responsible one who could handle it. My siblings needed more support to pursue their dreams. I kept paying while Jason's music career consisted of playing one open mic night where he forgot the words. Ashley's influencer career peaked at 500 followers despite my parents paying for professional photos. Then my parents raised my rent to $800. Said costs were going up and I had a full-time job now so I could afford it. Jason had never worked a day in his life at 20 years old. Ashley worked one shift a week at a boutique for the employee discount. But I was the one paying more. The real kicker came when I overheard my parents talking about their finances. They were putting my rent money directly into savings accounts for Jason and Ashley. My rent was literally funding my siblings' future while I couldn't save a penny. They called it their education funds, even though neither sibling was in school. Jason had dropped out of community college after one semester, and Ashley never even applied. I was taking night classes and paying my own tuition. When I confronted them, they said Jason and Ashley weren't as capable as me. They needed the financial cushion more. I was smart enough to make it on my own. That's when I learned my parents had been telling everyone I was living at home rent-free, mooching off them. They made themselves look like saints supporting their adult child while I was actually paying them $800 a month. My extended family thought I was a loser taking advantage of my parents. At family dinners, my aunt would make comments about me needing to grow up and support myself. My parents never corrected her. So I decided to play their game. I went to them and said they were right. I needed more responsibility. Asked them to write up a formal lease agreement so I could build rental history for my credit. They thought this was excellent adulting and wrote up this official-looking lease with terms and conditions. They were so proud of teaching me about contracts. Even took a photo with me signing it to post about their responsible parenting. Here's what they didn't realize. In our state, once you have a lease, you have tenant rights. And they'd just violated about 15 of them. No proper notice for rent increase. No receipt system for payments. No maintenance agreements. No security deposit documentation. They'd been entering my room without notice. Using my bathroom when theirs was occupied. Taking food I bought without permission. All violations. I started documenting everything. Every time my mom entered my room to borrow something without asking. Every time my dad used my laptop without permission. Every time they gave Jason or Ashley money while telling me to pay more. The lease they wrote said quiet enjoyment of the premises. Hard to enjoy when Jason practiced his guitar badly at midnight directly above my room. The lease said access to common areas. Hard to access when Ashley spread her photography equipment all over the living room every day. I sent them formal written complaints about each violation. They laughed at first, thought I was being dramatic. Then I stopped paying rent. Told them I was withholding it due to unaddressed lease violations, which was my legal right as a tenant. They lost their minds and demanded the money. I offered to pay if they fixed the violations. They said they didn't have to fix anything in their own house. Cool, then I didn't have to pay. They tried to kick me out, but I showed them the lease they wrote. They'd have to formally evict me, which would take months. They'd have to go to court and explain why they were evicting one child while the other two lived there free. They'd have to tell a judge about the savings accounts funded by my rent. They'd have to admit they'd been lying to everyone about me living free. The court records would be public. Everyone would know. My mom panicked and offered to reduce my rent back to $600. I countered with $0, same as my siblings. My dad's face went bright red and he started yelling that I was being disrespectful and ungrateful after everything they'd done for me. His voice got louder with each word. My mom jumped in right away saying they gave me a roof over my head, and this was how I repaid them by threatening legal action like some stranger. She put her hand on her chest like I'd physically hurt her. I stayed calm even though my heart was pounding. I explained I wasn't threatening anything, just asking for the same treatment Jason and Ashley got. $0 a month, same as them. My dad's face somehow got even redder and he stormed out of the room. My mom looked at me for a second like she wanted to say something else, then followed him out. I stood there alone in the kitchen holding my printed documentation of every single lease violation. The papers felt heavy in my hands. I could hear their bedroom door slam upstairs. That night I lay in bed trying to focus on my homework, but I kept hearing my parents arguing loudly in their bedroom. The walls in this house were thin enough that I could make out most of what they said. My mom's voice came through, first saying they should just let me stay rent-free to avoid problems. My dad's voice got loud again, insisting that would be rewarding my bad behavior. He said I needed to learn respect. My mom said something quieter that I couldn't hear. Then my dad said something about not being manipulated by their own daughter. The argument went on for over an hour. I gave up on homework and just lay there listening. Eventually, their voices got quieter, and I heard their TV turn on. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast, and the kitchen felt tense. My parents were already at the table eating cereal and not talking to each other. Jason walked in, scratching his head, and asked what was going on, because he'd heard yelling last night. I poured myself coffee and explained the whole situation while my parents sat there silently. I told him about the rent I'd been paying for years, about the lease violations, about the savings accounts funded by my money. Jason actually laughed and said I was being dramatic over a few $100s a month. He grabbed a bowl from the cabinet and said everyone pays rent when they're adults. I pointed out that he didn't pay rent. He shrugged and said that was different because he was focusing on his music. I asked when the last time he'd practiced was. He didn't answer. Ashley came downstairs in her pajamas holding her phone. She'd obviously heard part of the conversation because she jumped right in saying I was being selfish and making everything about me when they were just trying to pursue their dreams. Her voice had that whiny tone she used when she wanted sympathy. I looked right at her and said my rent money was literally funding those dreams. I told her about the savings accounts. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked at my parents like she expected them to deny it. My mom stared down at her cereal bowl. My dad got up and put his dishes in the sink with more noise than necessary. Ashley's face went pale and she sat down without getting any food. That evening, my parents called me into the living room. They were sitting together on the couch with serious expressions. My dad cleared his throat and said they'd discussed it and wanted to present a counteroffer. They'd reduce my rent to $400 per month as a compromise. My mom nodded and said that was more than fair. I sat down in the chair across from them and said the compromise was $0, same as my siblings. My dad started to interrupt, but I kept talking. I said we could let a judge decide what was fair if they preferred that option. I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I'd taken of the lease they wrote. Photos of my payment records. Photos of every documented violation. My mom's face went white. My dad stood up fast and said he was kicking me out immediately. His voice shook when he said it. I stayed sitting and calmly reminded him that was illegal without proper eviction proceedings. I explained that he'd have to file paperwork with the court. He'd have to wait for a hearing date. He'd have to explain to a judge why he was evicting one child while 2 others lived there free. I watched my mom's eyes get wider as she realized I actually knew my rights. She grabbed my dad's arm and pulled him back down to the couch. He was breathing hard like he'd been running. Nobody said anything for a long minute. Then my parents left the room without another word. At work the next day, I must have looked stressed because my coworker Katie came over during our morning break. She asked if I was okay. I hesitated, but then everything just came out. I told her the whole situation during our lunch break in the break room. About the rent while my siblings paid nothing. About the savings accounts. About the lease violations. Katie's eyes got huge and she kept saying she couldn't believe parents would do that. She said her own parents had their problems, but at least they treated all the kids the same. She asked if I had anywhere else to stay. I told her I was staying put because legally they couldn't force me out. Katie pulled out her phone and started texting someone. She told me her husband Barry worked in property management and knew everything about tenant rights. She insisted I talk to him because he'd helped people in similar situations before. She said Barry had seen landlords try all kinds of illegal stuff, and he always knew how to handle it. I wasn't sure about involving more people, but Katie wouldn't take no for an answer. She texted back and forth with Barry for a minute, then told me he wanted to meet with me. She said he could look at my lease and documentation. I agreed because at this point I needed all the help I could get. That weekend I met Barry at a coffee shop near my work. He was a tall guy in his 40s with glasses and a friendly smile. Katie had shown him some details already, so he knew the basics. I brought my folder with the lease and all my documentation. Barry spread everything out on the table between our coffee cups and started reading through it carefully. He took his time, making notes on a pad of paper. After about 20 minutes, he looked up and said my parents had violated multiple tenant rights. He pointed to specific sections of the lease they wrote and explained each violation. No proper notice for the rent increase from $600 to $800. No receipt system for my payments. No security deposit documentation even though the lease mentioned one. He flipped through my photos of the times they'd entered my room without notice. Barry confirmed I had a strong legal position if this went to court. He said most judges didn't look kindly on parents exploiting their adult children financially. He explained that the lease my parents wrote actually gave me more protections than they realized. He said I was doing the right thing by documenting everything and standing my ground. He wrote down the name of a tenant's rights attorney he knew who sometimes did free consultations. He said if my parents kept pushing, I should call this attorney. I felt relieved having someone confirm I wasn't crazy for fighting this. Barry said he'd be happy to testify as an expert witness if it came to that. He told me to keep documenting everything and not to let my parents pressure me into paying or leaving. We talked for another hour about my options and he answered all my questions. When I left the coffee shop, I felt more confident than I had in days. Barry wrote down the attorney's name and number on a napkin. Crystal Winters. He said she worked with young people dealing with family landlord problems and sometimes took cases for free when she thought someone was being taken advantage of. I thanked him and put the napkin in my wallet. When I got home that night, I went straight to my room and pulled out the napkin. I stared at the number for a while before I actually called. A receptionist answered, and I explained my situation as briefly as I could. She put me on hold for a few minutes. When she came back, she said Crystal had an opening Thursday afternoon if I could make it. I said yes immediately, even though I'd have to leave work early. The next few days dragged. I kept my documentation folder in my backpack everywhere I went. My parents tried talking to me a few times, but I kept conversations short. My mom asked if we could sit down and discuss things like adults. I told her we could discuss it after I talked to my attorney. Her face went pale when I said that word. Tuesday night, I was in my room studying when I heard a knock. Before I could answer, my mom opened the door. She had tears running down her face. She sat on the edge of my bed without asking and started crying harder. She said I was tearing the family apart over money. She asked why I couldn't just be the responsible one like I'd always been. She said Jason and Ashley looked up to me, and now I was setting a bad example by getting lawyers involved. I closed my textbook and looked at her. I asked her directly why being responsible meant I had to be treated worse than my siblings. She wiped her eyes and said it wasn't about treating me worse. She said Jason and Ashley just needed more help than I did. I asked her why they needed more help. She couldn't give me a real answer. She just kept saying they needed support to find their paths. I pointed out that I was finding my path too, but I had to pay for it myself, plus give them money every month. She stood up and said I was being difficult on purpose. She left my room and I heard her crying in the hallway. Thursday came and I left work at 2 to make my 3 o'clock appointment. Crystal's office was in a small building downtown. The waiting room had chairs that didn't match and magazines from last year. The receptionist smiled at me and said Crystal would be ready in a few minutes. I sat down with my folder on my lap. A woman came out of the back office. She was maybe in her 40s with dark hair pulled back and glasses. She walked right over to me and held out her hand. Crystal Winters. She had a firm handshake and direct eye contact. She led me back to her office, which had a big desk covered in files and papers. She cleared a space and told me to sit down. I opened my folder and started explaining everything. She listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. She said she'd seen cases like mine before. She said parents exploited their adult children financially all the time and convinced themselves it was for the kids' own good. She said the lease my parents wrote actually gave me strong legal protection. She asked if she could keep my documentation to make copies. I said yes. Crystal called in her paralegal. A guy named Luke came in carrying a camera. He was younger than Crystal, maybe late 20s. He started taking photos of every page in my folder. The lease, my payment records, the written complaints I'd sent my parents about lease violations. He worked methodically and didn't miss anything. Crystal explained that they needed everything documented properly in case this went to court. She said judges took these cases seriously when they saw clear evidence of exploitation. Luke finished taking photos and handed my originals back to me. Crystal said she'd draft a letter to my parents explaining their violations and my rights. The letter would state that I'd resume paying rent once they fixed all violations and gave me the same terms my siblings had, $0 monthly. I felt relief wash over me. Having a professional on my side made everything feel more real and less like I was just being dramatic. Crystal said she'd have the letter ready by Monday and would mail it certified, so my parents had to sign for it. She said not to be surprised if they reacted badly. She told me to document any threats or harassment. I thanked her and she said not to worry about payment right now. She'd figure something out because she hated seeing parents take advantage of their kids. I left her office feeling stronger than I had in months. The letter arrived at my parents' house on Wednesday. I was at work when my phone started ringing. My dad. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. Then my mom called. I didn't answer. During my lunch break, I listened to the voicemails. My dad was screaming about how I got lawyers involved in family business. He said I was destroying our relationship over a few $100s. My mom's message was her crying and saying I was ruining everything. When I got home that evening, my dad was waiting in the living room. He started yelling the second I walked in. How dare I bring lawyers into this? How dare I threaten them in their own house? My mom was on the couch crying. I stayed calm and said I wasn't threatening anyone. I was just asking for the same treatment Jason and Ashley got. My dad's face turned red. He said if I wanted to play legal games, then maybe Jason and Ashley should start paying rent too. He yelled for them to come downstairs. Jason came down first, looking confused. Ashley followed a minute later. My dad told them that starting next month, they'd both be paying $300 rent. Jason's mouth fell open. He said he couldn't afford that. My dad asked why not. Jason stammered that he didn't have a job. My dad said that was exactly the point. If I didn't have to pay, then nobody got a free ride anymore. Ashley started crying and said she was building her career and couldn't afford rent. My dad said she better figure it out then. Jason looked at me like this was my fault. I just stared back at him. This was the first time he'd ever had to think about money, and it showed on his face. He asked my dad if he was serious. My dad said completely serious. Everyone pays, or nobody pays. My mom was still crying on the couch. Jason went back upstairs without another word. Ashley followed him. The next day, Ashley posted something on TikTok. I didn't see it at first, but Katie showed me at work. It was Ashley in her room looking sad with text overlay about toxic family members who cause drama. Some audio track about being misunderstood played in the background. The video had maybe 30 views. Katie rolled her eyes and said my sister was ridiculous. That evening, my mom shared the video on Facebook with a long caption about how hard it was when your children turned against you. She didn't mention any actual details, just vague stuff about family struggles and staying strong. I read through the comments. My aunt had written that some kids didn't appreciate their parents' sacrifices. Other relatives agreed. Nobody knew what was actually happening. They all thought I was the problem based on my parents' lies. Saturday morning, my aunt called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but decided I was done hiding. She started in immediately about how I was being selfish and tearing the family apart. I interrupted her. I asked if she knew I'd been paying $800 a month in rent. She went quiet. I told her the whole story. How I'd paid since I was 18. How Jason and Ashley never paid anything. How my parents put my rent money in savings accounts for my siblings. How they told everyone I lived free. My aunt didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said she had no idea. She said my parents always made it sound like I was the one taking advantage. She apologized for judging me without knowing the truth. She said the favoritism wasn't right, and she was sorry for the comments she'd made at family dinners. I thanked her for listening. She said she was going to call my parents and get their side, but she believed me. After we hung up, I felt like maybe someone in my family finally understood what I'd been dealing with. Within the hour, my phone started lighting up with texts from relatives I barely talked to. My uncle wanted to know if it was true I'd been paying rent. My cousin asked why my parents never mentioned it. Even my grandma called asking what was going on with the family. I responded to each one with the basic facts. $800 a month since I turned 18. Jason and Ashley paid nothing. My rent went into savings accounts for them. My parents told everyone I lived free. The responses came back fast. My uncle said that wasn't right. My cousin said she always wondered why my parents acted like I was lazy when I worked full-time. My grandma said she needed to talk to my mom about this. By dinner time, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My parents' phones must have been worse because I could hear my mom on the phone in the kitchen getting louder with each call. She kept saying it was private family business and people needed to stay out of it. My dad grabbed the phone from her at one point and told whoever was calling that I was making them look bad on purpose. I stayed in my room with my door locked and let them deal with the mess they'd created by lying to everyone. The next morning, my mom knocked on my door. She looked tired and her eyes were red. She said my dad wanted to make me an offer to settle everything. I followed her downstairs where my dad sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and some papers. He said they'd refund 6 months of rent to show good faith. That was $4,800. In exchange, I'd stop talking to relatives about family finances. I took a photo of the papers with my phone and told them I needed to think about it. Then I texted the photo to Crystal. She called me back within 20 minutes. Her voice was sharp when she told me not to accept anything without getting proper legal documentation. She said the offer was them trying to control the narrative and shut me up. She asked if there were conditions attached. I read her the papers and she made a disgusted sound. She said they were trying to buy my silence while admitting no wrongdoing. She told me to reject it and let her handle the negotiations. 2 days later, an email arrived from my dad with an attached document. I opened it and started reading. They'd refund the $4,800, but I had to agree to pay $300 monthly going forward. I also had to sign something saying I wouldn't discuss family financial matters with anyone outside the immediate family. There was a whole paragraph about protecting family privacy and maintaining respectful boundaries. I forwarded it to Crystal without responding to my parents. She called me that evening sounding annoyed. She said my parents were still trying to control me while pretending to compromise. She asked if I wanted her to respond. I said yes. She told me she'd send them a letter with her terms and they could take it or see me in housing court. Crystal's letter arrived at my parents' house 3 days later. I was at work when my dad called screaming into the phone. He said my lawyer was threatening them and making unreasonable demands. I asked what demands. He said Crystal wanted a full-year refund and 0 rent going forward. I told him those seemed fair since that's what Jason and Ashley got. He said I was being ridiculous and hung up. That night at dinner, my parents didn't speak to me at all. Jason asked what was happening and my mom told him it was between them and me. Ashley scrolled on her phone, ignoring everyone. The silence felt heavy, but I didn't try to fill it. 4 days passed with my parents not speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. Then my dad showed up at my work during my afternoon shift. I was restocking shelves when I saw him walking toward me. He started talking before he even reached me. He said we needed to talk about this lawyer situation like adults. I told him Crystal was handling everything and all communication should go through her. He raised his voice and said I was his daughter and he had a right to talk to me. Other customers started looking over. My manager came out from the back office. My dad kept talking about how I was tearing the family apart over money. My manager stepped between us and asked my dad to leave. My dad looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Then he turned and walked out. My manager asked if I was okay. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. She told me to take my break early. That evening, Katie called me. She said Barry wanted to know if I needed a place to stay. She said their guest room was available if things got worse at home. I felt something release in my chest that I didn't know was tight. Having somewhere to go made everything feel less scary. I thanked her and said I'd let her know. She said the offer stood any time. After we hung up, I sat on my bed looking around my room, knowing I could leave if I needed to, made staying feel like a choice instead of a trap. The deadline crystal set was 1 week from her letter. On day 5, my mom came to my room. She said they'd talked to their own lawyer. She said fighting this in court would be expensive and embarrassing for everyone. She asked what it would take for me to drop the whole thing. I told her Crystal's terms were fair. 0 rent like my siblings and a full refund for the past year. My mom's face got tight. She said that was $9,600. I said that's what I'd paid them. She left without saying anything else. Day 6 passed with no word. On day 7, my dad knocked on my door in the morning before I left for work. He said they'd agree to Crystal's terms. His voice was flat. He said they'd refund the full year and I could live rent-free going forward. Same as Jason and Ashley. I asked if he was putting that in writing. He said their lawyer was drafting the agreement. I told him to send it to Crystal. He nodded and walked away. I got ready for work feeling strange. I'd won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like something in my family had broken that wouldn't get fixed. The refund check arrived 4 days later. $9,600 made out to me. I stared at it for a long time before taking it to a different bank than my parents used. I opened a savings account and deposited the whole amount. The teller smiled and congratulated me on starting to save. I thanked her and took my receipt. Walking out to my car, I looked at the balance printed on the paper. All that money I'd paid them sitting in an account with my name on it. It felt real in a way it hadn't before. I'd been right to fight for fair treatment. The money proved it. The atmosphere at home changed completely after that. My parents stopped trying to talk to me about anything beyond basic household stuff. Jason avoided me entirely and spent most of his time in his room. Ashley walked past me like I wasn't there. Family dinners happened in total silence, with everyone eating quickly and leaving the table. My mom tried to make conversation a few times, but it died fast when nobody else participated. I ate my food and went back to my room. The house felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The next morning, my mom knocked on my door early. She came in without waiting for me to answer and sat on the edge of my bed. She started talking about household expenses and how they really did need my rent money to keep things running. I sat up and looked at her. I pointed out that she and Dad had been putting my rent into savings accounts for Jason and Ashley. If they needed it for household expenses, then why was it sitting in bank accounts for my siblings? She opened her mouth and closed it again. Her face got red and she stood up quickly. She left my room without saying anything else. 2 weeks went by with nobody talking much. Then one night at dinner, my dad cleared his throat and made an announcement. Starting next month, Jason and Ashley would each pay $300 in rent. Jason dropped his fork and it clattered against his plate. He started saying that wasn't fair and he couldn't afford it. My dad held up his hand and told Jason to stop talking. He said if I didn't have to pay, then nobody got a free ride anymore. Ashley's mouth fell open, but she didn't say anything. I kept eating my food and didn't look at anyone. Jason pushed his chair back and stomped upstairs to his room. Ashley followed him a minute later. My parents sat there in silence and I finished my dinner alone with them. The next week, Jason was suddenly very busy. He printed out his resume and started applying to jobs online. He went to the mall and dropped off applications at every store. Within 5 days, he had an interview at a music store downtown. 2 days after that, he came home and told everyone he got the job. He'd be working 4 days a week helping customers and organizing inventory. My dad nodded and said that was good. Jason looked at me across the table, but I just ate my food. It was funny how fast he could find work when he actually needed to. He'd spent 2 years saying nobody was hiring and he needed to focus on his music. Turned out jobs were available the whole time. Ashley tried a different approach. She stopped going to her boutique job completely and told my parents she couldn't afford rent while building her influencer career. She needed to dedicate all her time to content creation if she wanted to grow her following. My mom looked at my dad, and my dad shook his head. He told Ashley she had 2 choices: pay the $300 a month or find somewhere else to live. Ashley's eyes got wide and she started crying. She said they were ruining her dreams and being unfair. My dad didn't change his expression. He said she had until the end of the week to decide. Ashley ran upstairs and I heard her door slam. The next day, she was on her laptop applying to jobs. She got hired at a coffee shop near the mall within 3 days. Living at home felt wrong even though I wasn't paying rent anymore. The air felt heavy and nobody looked at each other during meals. I started thinking about getting my own place. I texted Barry and asked if he could help me understand what I could afford and what to look for in a lease. He texted back right away and said to come by his office that weekend. Saturday morning, I drove to the property management company where he worked. He had a big desk covered in folders and a computer with 2 monitors. He pulled up a chair for me and we spent an hour going over my finances. He showed me how to calculate what percentage of my income should go to rent. He explained about security deposits and utility costs. He pulled up apartment listings in my area and showed me what to look for in lease terms. By the end, I had a list of 5 places to look at and felt like I actually understood what I was doing. Community college that week, Annie stopped me after class. She taught my business fundamentals course and had always been nice to me. She said she'd noticed my assignments were getting better and I seemed more focused in class. She asked if everything was okay. I told her about the housing situation with my parents and how resolving it had freed up mental space. She nodded and said stress affects everything, including schoolwork. She told me she was proud of how I'd handled things and that I was doing great in her class. It felt good to have someone notice the positive changes. I thanked her and headed to my next class feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I spent the next 2 weeks looking at apartments. Most of them were too expensive or in bad neighborhoods. Then I found a small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building. It had a tiny kitchen and bathroom, but the main room was decent sized. The landlord showed me around and explained that rent was $750 monthly, including all utilities. I did the math in my head. That was less than the $800 my parents had been charging me. I'd be paying less to live on my own than I'd paid to live in their house. The irony wasn't lost on me. I filled out the application that day and got approved 3 days later. When I told my parents I was moving out, my mom's face changed. She looked genuinely sad and asked if we could repair our relationship. I told her honestly that I needed space to figure out if I wanted them in my life after how they'd treated me. She started crying and my dad put his arm around her. He didn't say anything, but his jaw was tight. I went upstairs to start packing my stuff. I had a month before my lease started, but I wanted to be ready. The week before I moved, Jason knocked on my door. He asked if he could help me move my stuff to the new apartment. I was surprised, but said yes. Moving day came and Jason showed up with his car. We loaded boxes and furniture and made 3 trips back and forth. On the last trip, he told me he never realized how unfair things had been until he had to get a job himself. He said he was sorry for laughing at me when I first brought up the rent situation. He admitted he'd been living in a bubble and our parents had let him stay there. I told him I appreciated the apology. We carried the last box up to my apartment and he helped me arrange the furniture. Before he left, he hugged me and said he hoped we could stay close. Ashley didn't apologize, but she did stop posting vague complaints about me on social media. I noticed because Katie showed me that Ashley had deleted all the posts about family drama and toxic siblings. A week after I moved out, Ashley got her first real paycheck from the coffee shop. She posted a picture of it with a caption about honest work and earning your own way. She was working 4 days a week now and seemed less focused on becoming internet famous. My mom told me Ashley had started talking about maybe going to community college next semester. Reality had hit both my siblings and they were handling it differently, but at least they were handling it. Moving into my studio felt different from day one. I picked out a small secondhand couch in dark blue fabric and set it against the wall near the window. The kitchen area had just enough room for a small table and 2 chairs, and I bought myself real dishes instead of using paper plates like I'd done at my parents' house to avoid arguments about whose turn it was to wash them. I hung up some posters I'd kept rolled up in my closet for years, because Ashley always complained they were ugly, and my mom would take them down. Now they were on my walls and nobody could say anything about it. I cooked actual meals for myself and ate them whenever I wanted without Jason showing up to take half my food, or my dad helping himself to leftovers I'd been saving. My stuff stayed exactly where I put it. My shampoo stayed in my shower. My snacks stayed in my cabinet. Nobody borrowed my laptop or used my towels or took my phone charger. The freedom was bigger than I'd expected it to be. A week after I moved in, Crystal called to tell me she was closing out my case file. She said she never charged me for any of her work because parents who exploit their kids financially made her genuinely angry, and she was glad to help me stand up for myself. I tried to offer her something, but she refused and told me to put that money toward my future instead. I thanked her about 5 times before we hung up and promised to send her a card. Katie and I started hanging out on weekends after she helped me through the worst of the conflict with my parents. We'd grab coffee or walk around the mall or just watch movies at her place with Barry. Having a real friend who knew the whole story and supported me anyway meant more than I could explain. She never judged me for the legal stuff or made me feel bad about going against my family. She just listened and told me I deserved better treatment. 3 months went by in my new apartment and I settled into a routine that felt stable for the first time in years. I worked my shifts, went to my classes, came home to my own space, and saved money every month because I wasn't paying rent anymore. Then my phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking if we could meet for coffee and talk. I stared at the message for a few minutes before responding that I'd meet her at the coffee shop near campus. Part of me was curious if she was actually ready to admit what she'd done wrong, or if this was going to be another attempt to guilt me into coming back. I got to the coffee shop first and ordered a regular coffee with cream. My mom showed up 10 minutes later looking tired and older than I remembered. She ordered tea and we sat down at a corner table away from other people. She started talking right away and told me she was genuinely sorry for the favoritism and the financial exploitation. She said she'd convinced herself that I was stronger and more capable than Jason and Ashley, so it was okay to treat me differently and expect more from me. But she could see now how wrong that was and how much damage it had caused. She admitted that she'd been using my supposed strength as an excuse to take advantage of me while babying my siblings. Hearing her actually say the words out loud made something tight in my chest loosen up a little. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that rebuilding trust was going to take time. She nodded and said she understood, and that she'd wait as long as I needed. 2 days after meeting with my mom, I got an email from my dad. It was shorter than my mom's apology and felt less personal, but he did acknowledge that he'd been wrong to charge me rent while letting Jason and Ashley live free. He said he was sorry for not treating me fairly, and that he hoped we could work on our relationship going forward. The email felt stiff and uncomfortable, like he'd struggled with every word, but I appreciated that he'd at least tried to admit he messed up. I wrote back a brief response thanking him for the apology. Over the next few months, I started meeting my parents for dinner at restaurants once every couple weeks. We kept things neutral and talked about surface-level stuff like work and school and the weather. They were learning to treat me like an independent adult instead of a source of income or a problem to manage. My mom stopped trying to give me advice about every decision I made, and my dad stopped acting like I owed him something for raising me. The dynamic was different now and felt more balanced. Jason and I actually grew closer after I moved out. He started texting me more often, and we'd grab lunch together sometimes after his shifts at the music store. He told me he finally understood how unfair things had been once he had to start working and paying his own way. He said he was sorry for laughing at me when I first complained about the rent situation, and admitted he'd been living in a bubble that our parents created for him. He was still working at the music store and seemed happier having structure and purpose in his life instead of just sitting around playing video games all day. He even started taking guitar lessons seriously and practicing regularly. A year after moving into my studio apartment, I was doing better than I'd ever done before. My grades at community college were strong, and I'd started looking into four-year universities to transfer to. The money I'd saved from the rent refund, plus not paying rent for those final months at home, had built up a solid financial foundation. I had almost $8,000 in my savings account and a real plan for my future. My relationship with my family was better now because it was based on mutual respect instead of obligation and exploitation. Standing up for myself had been hard and scary, but it taught everyone in my family that fair treatment wasn't something they could negotiate away. I was worth the same consideration as anyone else, and I wasn't going to accept less than that ever again.